Freaking GM doors. I need another project. This car has numerous things that it needs, including a transmission overhaul. The 68 GMC needs a lot of little stuff. The Datsun needs a ton of work, and I have two other projects that have yet to make it on the channel because I just don't have time for them. But this thing should just need some preventative maintenance, and hopefully it'll be good to go. And here is the magnificent vehicle of excess. So this thing is a 2002. I'm going to call it a Suburban most of the time because Yukon XL doesn't sound that cool, and this is basically a Suburban. This one actually has the auto ride and everything with it. So it has the whatever computer controlled shocks and everything. The interior, shockingly decent. These seats, whatever material this is, just really didn't hold up that great on any of them. This thing was filthy disgusting. And I bought it from an old couple. The guy wasn't there. But the lady, I think, said that the dude was 91 years old and that they'd had this thing forever and it was the best Suburban they've ever had. So, I mean, if that dude's 91, I really don't even keep a clean car right now. So, I can only imagine this dude at 91. I mean, he probably didn't care about it at all. So, I got everything cleaned up. Turned out pretty decent. Armor-alled everything. That just kind of helped with the car smell. That's locked. Just because this thing had sat for about a year. All right, that door doesn't unlock. All right, well, we can add that to the list of things to mess with. This thing had sat for about a year, and in that time, you know, just from sitting, had a little bit of a smell in it, got that pretty well sorted. Had probably 2 hours in cleaning the carpet, and it's still stained and gross looking, but it's at least cleaner. Thing's got a sunroof in it. All the luxury. It's got the memory position seats in it. It's got the freaking OnStar thing that's never worked and probably never will work. The radio works. It's got a little head unit here for anybody in the back. The third row folds down 2 different ways and you can just totally take the thing out. And this thing is 4-wheel drive, which is slick. So this was pretty much a dream car that I had wanted once I realized that they were a thing. This body style's really grown on me, but I really didn't want one as a half ton. I wanted the Suburban. I wanted it to be a 3/4 ton. I wanted it to be a 4-wheel drive. And most importantly, because no compromises, I wanted the Vortec 8100.
Chevy Suburban. With an available 8.1-liter Vortec engine, it's capable of towing up to 6 tons, making it the best Suburban yet. Chevy Suburban, like a rock.
That is an 8.1-liter, 496 cubic inch big block V8. How cool is that? So the Cadillac 500 from the 70s is the only GM motor that went into production vehicles that beats this thing on displacement. You know, and it only beats it by 4 cubic inches. So this thing is still a big block Chevy. It's got some weird stuff on it. The big deal though that I need to do is get a whole bunch of preventive maintenance caught up on it. Replace all the coolant hoses, throw a new thermostat. Obviously it needs a new radiator because that thing's busted in it. Somehow it made it 2 hours home, so it's got to be busted somewhere up at the top. Do all the filters, service the transmission, the diffs, the transfer case. Hopefully find no drama in there. But that's the plan now, and I'm just so excited to actually have this thing. All right, first problem we got is getting all these plastic clips out. I'm gonna try to not break any of them. Nice, nice. So those fall out. Note to self. Plastic removed. Not gonna lie, it took me a little minute to figure out how these little clips down here come out. I thought I had to squeeze on the bottom, which was confusing because I didn't understand how I was gonna be able to do that. But they work just like the other ones. They have a deal in the middle. You can get under it, pull it up, and the whole thing will come out. The older generation, the GMT 800, instead of being these plastic deals, these would have been bolts in the corner with a threaded clip that would clip into the plastic so it doesn't fall off. As long as you had a long extension, they're pretty easy to get to. Alright, well that one's gone. Got the air intake hose off, and if you don't have one of these tools, I don't know what it's called, but they pay for themselves. The idea is that you can get under a piece of rubber, something that's clamped on, and you can run this guy around a little bit and it'll get the whole thing broke loose, so it pretty much just falls right off. Why? What is happening here? I don't understand what's happening. That's a quality clamp. This shroud here, it was just clipped in place, or it was just dropped down into a bracket. You got to unclip the oil cooler hard line down there from it in order for it to move, and then it'll flop around. Answers that question. These have to be the original hoses, and the clamp is molded into the hose, so that's why I could not get the clamp to slide back. You can see how swollen the hose is right there. I'm betting this guy was not long for this world. I did figure out on the next clamp, they do lock in place, which is pretty nice. So if you can get it to lock in place, then you don't have to fight with that as much. So there are these quick connects for the oil cooler and the transmission cooler lines, and the new Radiator came with new ones of those since they have an O-ring in them. So I don't need to unscrew them, I just need to shoot that clip off into the ether and hope that I don't need it, and then the line should just pull right out of it and start dumping oil everywhere. Oh, we got lucky, no oil. That I've been fighting with this stupid quick connect because I can't get the clip out of it because I can't see what's going on with it and I can't get anything down here, so I'm just trying to take the whole thing out now. But it reminded me of an idea I had for a pretty good show. I think it'd be pretty entertaining to take design engineers and on this show lock them in a room with something that they designed and say, hey, the service manual says this job should take you 5 minutes. 5 minutes to get done. So you have 5 minutes to do that task. And then as soon as the clock starts, the room starts filling with water. And see if they can get these things apart that they designed in a timely manner. Because this is the kind of stupid stuff that makes doing this really irritating. Alright, now I just gotta get these two supports unbolted. And this thing should be ready to come out here. So on the GMT 400, they didn't even have bolts actually bolting the radiator in. They just relied on the whole fan shroud assembly to hold the radiator in place. But I guess on this design they decided they needed just a little extra help on that front. Right. What is still holding you? Okay. Well, let me get that guy off. I'm going to put some paper towels in these oil cooling lines so I don't get any debris in them. Tows like a solid 2 seconds of effort, and I just can't be bothered. We're just going to do that. That'll solve that problem. Now, will this thing come out of here? Oh, don't tell me it's hitting on that. Tell me anything other than that. Oh no. I guess the battery's gotta come out? I don't know, it's starting to sound like a Haynes manual. Step 1, remove the battery. Well, let me show you what I'm up against here. This is some grade A, name brand garbage. I don't know. So I can't get the radiator out because it hits the metal bracket that is holding in the air filter housing. I can't get the air filter housing off. What past Trevor did not realize is if you just pull up on the airbox, it will slide out of its rubber mounts without actually breaking anything, and then you have access to unbolt everything. Alright, if you just channel a little bit of frustration and rip up on the airbox, take all the bolts out for that plate, and then this guy will flop around. It'll only be connected by the flexible inner wheel well. And then maybe, if you're lucky, maybe the radiator will come out. And just like that, the radiator is out. What would have taken probably 10 to 15 minutes, probably 15 minutes on a GMT 400. I think I'm running up on an hour, I think, at this point. Granted, I had to figure out how to actually get it out, but definitely harder than the old body style. And here is the old radiator lined up with the new one. I got this new one through Radiator Express. Somehow it was only like $50 more than the plastic tank one from a parts store. But the reason that I want nothing to do with these plastic tank ones is because my dad's truck for the longest time had these plastic tank radiators in it, and they were good for about 2 years. About 2 years, it would break the drain plug right there, and that'd be the end of it. So I wanted to get rid of all the plastic stuff, all aluminum. Hopefully we'll never have to mess with it again. So this is the condenser side of the radiator, just packed with all kinds of filth. And another benefit of going with the aluminum one is you can see how much thicker the aluminum one is. So this guy, I think this guy's gonna be a 2-core if I had to guess. And this guy over here is a 3. So we're gonna get more cooling out of it, which will be nice. I'd like to flush at least the heater core lines and everything. So I think what I'm gonna do is I need to get this hose off because I need to replace it anyways. Part of the problem with that is the clamp was in a really awkward spot, so I took these pliers and kind of jammed them up back here and rotated the clamp around where hopefully I'll actually be able to get on it. And once I have that guy off, I'll take this hose off, flush out all the heater core lines going that way. In the spirit of suffering now to not suffer later, one thing I'm trying to do with this cooling system, and it's pretty much the same thing I did with the S10 and the 68 GMC, is I'm getting rid of all of the plastic that I can in the cooling system. So the plastic tanks on the radiator, those are gone. Big deal here is, so those 2 lines right there, that is for the rear heat. This has a heater core all the way at the back of the car. It has a heater and evaporator, and it just pulls air from the back of the car and circulates it to the rear seats. So those 2 lines is how coolant is getting all the way to that heater core. They run underneath the car, and there's flexible line back there. One thing that was extremely helpful, I don't know what this type of pliers is called, but they're designed for pulling hoses off of stuff. That's why it has that unique end on it. But that unique end is absolutely perfect for taking apart things like this, because you can get the teeth on the end of it there, and you can just pinch down right on those 2 blocks, whatever you want to call them. You can just pinch down right on those guys and wiggle the thing apart, and you're all good. But I'm going to try and come up with a replacement for this guy, because at some point this is going to break, and I really don't want to mess with it. So I'm going to come up with a metal thing, we'll flare it, hopefully just have some hose clamps, and we'll call that good. But I got to see what the hardware store has. At Lowe's, where a unsettling amount of my car parts come from, but I think between all these guys I can make something work. So here's the other copper elbow. So I already have that one installed. This is the second one. So the idea is I'm using these to adapt the 5/8 heater core to the 3/8 line that actually runs to the rear heater core. And then this guy is doing the same thing, and it's replacing this plastic T. So there's these 2 plastic T's on either end of the heater core, the main heater core. And I'm gonna be replacing that with this guy. So it's all just soldered copper pipe. So it's, if I remember right, this is how the sizes ended up working out. 1/2 inch copper pipe. So it's pipe, so you measure by the inner diameter. And then hose, you're gonna measure by the inner diameter. So 1/2 inch pipe fits pretty good with a 5/8 hose. So 1/2 inch tube fits really good with the 5/8 hose. Down here, I ended up going with 3/8 because their 1/4 inch was probably gonna be too small. So I'm just hoping I can stretch the 3/8 hose onto that guy. And as far as making these flares on this guy, I just had a flare tool here. It does 1/2 inch, so the 3/8 pipe goes with the 1/2 inch, because you're going by the outer diameter of this 3/8 pipe is going to be about 1/2 inch, because the 3/8 is measured from the inner diameter, and you need 5/8 in order to do the 1/2 inch. So that's how I did that. So this will get rid of all the plastic fittings in the heater lines. So here's what we got. I already made a little bit of progress on this guy. We'll talk about it in just a second. But I'm going to try and get this guy over here apart. So I got to get these plastic clips squeezed in. Alright, so I couldn't get that one to come apart peacefully. So I resorted to breaking the whole thing. Using those pliers, I just broke the black plastic piece out. A little bit of water in there. There's no antifreeze because I flushed the cooling system earlier, so that's why it's just water. So if that had come apart peacefully, then we could technically save this plastic piece that's now stuck on there. These plastic fittings are just the worst. This was not the way. So you can see this guy's already been replaced once. And the way I understand it is at least it wasn't obvious to me, that there's any connection point to replace this rubber hose. It seems like if you want to replace this rubber hose, you have to go all the way to the front of the car, up to that T. So that's probably why somebody did this job here. I mean, they used 2 hose clamps, so I'm not sure I'd call it a hack job, but it's not adequate for me. So now what I need to do is clean this up again, and I'm going to put my flaring tool on here, and I'm going to put a nice flare on this guy, just like I did this guy right here. That'll give the hose something to grab. So the hose clamp will come loose at some point. Not really the clamp, but that rubber will shrink up a little. Basically be the same thing as the clamp coming loose. And that flare is what's going to keep the whole thing from just blowing off. Oh, I forgot to mention, so if this guy wasn't already cut, one of these low profile tube cutters will work perfect for cutting that. And I went ahead and just tweaked it out of the way a little bit. You know, it was tucked all the way back there. I bent it out so that I have better access to it, and so that it'll have more of a straight shot to the new elbow that I'm going to be putting in. Alright, so if you look up in here, we could clamp onto this, but then we run the problem of the hose loosening up and blowing off, which we really don't want. So there's this convenient little collar, or whatever you want to call it, built into the tube. So if we can get on top of that, then we can put a clamp up here, and that'll keep everything from sliding off, because I don't have a way of flaring that guy even if I wanted to. The problem is this hose really doesn't want to push up over that. So this hose I'm using, it's the Gates Green Stripe 5/8 heater hose. It's really thick. Pretty sure it's some kind of industrial grade hose. So to help it out with getting over that shoulder, I'm going to cut a chamfer on the inside of the hose. So this chamfer is going to basically act as a ramp to get it over that shoulder without hopefully without a whole lot of struggle. Since this hose is so thick, it doesn't really stretch that easily. Alright, I'm gonna have to cheat a little bit and put some oil on it. Okay, I tried shaving a little bit more off, maybe that'll help it. So the technique seems to be twist and just wiggle around. Got these lines wrapped up, pretty pleased with it. I made a mistake earlier, and I don't know why it didn't occur to me, but I'm using 1/2 inch pipe because that fits well with a 5/8 hose. Somehow I thought a 3/8 hose was going to fit with the 3/8 pipe, and there's absolutely no way that the hose is ever going to go over the 3/8 pipe. So this is 1/2-inch hose. So you have to use 1/2-inch hose, 3/8 pipe, 1/2-inch pipe, 5/8 hose. So that's how that all worked out. So everything is flared except for this guy up here, but you can see where it's all bulged out. There's that, whatever, that collar built into the tube there. So that's going to keep that thing from coming loose. So everything should be good under here. I got the hose clamps all tight, and now I can basically do the same thing I did here, but do it for those T's up at the front. Decided to go ahead and put this elbow on first. Had to trim a little bit off of each end, and starting with putting this end on worked better first. Basically just get the angle right and just push the whole thing on, and then put the small diameter end on. Made sure the hose clamps are facing in directions that I can tighten them later. And this hose was getting ready, this is the old one, it was getting ready to let go. You can see how swollen it is. But if I squeeze it, you can see the cracks that were forming in it. So definitely a good thing to be doing this now. I had made some progress here. I got these 2 T's installed. Getting these hoses at the back onto the heater core was by far the hardest part of this, but it wasn't that bad. I just put a chamfer on the inside of the hose, lubed them up a little bit, and they were able to get past that collar that's built into the tube. So they're set up pretty much the exact same as the ones that we did on the back earlier. The only thing that I forgot to mention earlier when doing this is, I mean, you're kind of taking the risk of breaking the heater cord potentially, so, you know, don't get too crazy with it, you know, pulling around on it and whatnot. So I just gently, you know, worked them on there. I didn't try fighting it super hard. And then I had to obviously cut these guys, put a nice flare on them, tweak them around a little bit. Kind of sucks that the transmission dipstick's right between the 2 of them, but there really wasn't a good way of doing that without some more modification. I maybe could have cut it down here and ran the hose over the top, but I mean, I can still get to it, so it's not the end of the world. So everything's flared, everything's got hose clamps. This guy's already run, so this is the guy, this is the line on the right from this perspective, and it runs up here to this coolant manifold, whatever you want to call it. This end here is what's going to run to the radiator, which is why it's not installed yet. Alright, before we get the radiator going, I'm going to go ahead and get this tensioner replaced. I'm sure it's the original one, so there's really no point in not replacing it. Both bolts are the same. Alright, I got new part, old part, looks to be the same, and I can't believe this, honestly. Both these say made in Canada, and as far as the markings on the back of them, they're almost exactly the same. So that's kind of cool. I wonder if this isn't a new old stock part. Go ahead and get this guy snugged in and throw the belt on for the AC compressor first, because it has to go on first before this main drive belt. Alright, Gates belt, this is for the AC compressor, and here's the belt that I'm going to be running for the main drive belt. Trying to remember the belt routing from memory. I think it goes something like this. Alright, it doesn't go something like that. Alright, I gotta look at the diagram. Now that I've consulted the drawing, maybe I can actually get this on here. Well, that's a dilemma. Okay, maybe that'll work. Alright, it looks like everybody is along for the ride. Alright. Go ahead and knock out this guy too while we're here. No reason to not go ahead and throw a thermostat in this thing. A little bit of GM-itis going on. This guy is bolted to the stud on top of that thermostat bolt. which in and of itself is not a problem, but the problem is it requires removing this tube to actually get the bolt out. So I'm going to rinse the dirt off this as best I can so that hopefully I don't knock anything down into the power steering pump. Then take this guy. I already got the clamp off of it, obviously. Oh man, this is becoming one of those deals. Alright, I had a smaller one of these, and going for this lower one was the strategy. I have no idea why that top one will not come apart, but it is absolutely not interested. So I'll leave the hose on there just so don't accidentally knock anything down into the reservoir, because that would be lame. Oh, alright, not gonna lie, I was expecting a little bit of a fight from that. I don't particularly care about saving this guy, but I'd like to not tear anything up if I can avoid it. Yeah, it looks pretty cruddy looking. 195 degree thermostat, so that's good. So clean this up, throw a new thermostat in, put the housing back together. Alright, thermostat's done. Alright, put these rubber feet on, and we'll see if those guys will stay on long enough to get this thing installed. My guess is no, they will not. And sure enough, they're taped on this time. Let's try this again. So we're getting into the fan. Not a fan of that. Oh my gosh, that dog is annoying. So the problem I have here is the radiator is too tall and it's hitting the core support here on either side. The original radiator tanks had a radius on the top of them, so it cleared. But this aluminum one is just a square and the corner of it is hitting the core support. So I tried trimming down, it's actually hitting the bracket first. So I tried trimming down the bracket that's welded onto the top of the tank. Basically just put a radius on the edge of it, and that helped a lot, but it's still not there. So what I'm trying now is, there are these little rubber feet on the bottom of the radiator, and this one has a little raised section right here, and I'm cutting that off flush, hoping that maybe that 1/8 of an inch will give me enough clearance. While I was looking at the condenser again, I wasn't too thrilled with how clean it was, or really how dirty it was. So I'm going to try, I have a low pressure nozzle, and I'm going to try blowing everything out the front of it. So when they send you this radiator, at least if you get it through Radiator Express, they'll send you 3 different sizes of fittings here, and depending on what transmission you have, there's apparently a 3/8 line like this one, a 5/8, and I think the other one is 3/4 or something like that. Maybe it's 1/2 inch and 5/8. Anyways, so you just pick the one that is correct for your lines. It just has an O-ring on it, thread it in, snug it down, and then the only time these quick connects are worth anything, installed. I'll even put the plastic over it. Now, is that worth all the struggle of getting it off? I'd say no. This thing's just friggin' beating me to death. So I get to these quick connects. These fittings are wrong. They don't work with the factory oil cooler lines. This inner diameter here is too small in order for the oil cooler line to actually clip in. So you think, we'll just take the old one out and put the old one in then. Different thread pitch, can't put it in. So that's nice. Oh, sun's starting to go down now, but made a little bit of progress. Took a die grinder, opened up the inner diameter of this a little bit, so now the oil cooler line will actually fit into it. And the next problem I had is because this radiator is thicker, this oil cooler line was getting into the this protective cover for the computer. That problem kind of fixed itself though. There's supposed to be a tab on this cover right down there that it clips on, and it's what holds the cover on this side. In trying to just bend that a little bit, I snapped the whole thing off. So it just has this one tab here holding it, but the oil cooler line is holding this end in place. So I guess some problems solve themselves. Also worth noting, I cleaned all the metal out of these. I took the O-rings out of them and cleaned them out really good. This funnel's pretty cool. It comes with all kinds of fittings, so it'll seal up to a radiator or a bottle in this case. And it has this nice little deal in it, so when you want to start filling it, you can pull this up, just leave it sitting in here. If it starts overflowing, you just pop that in there. You take the funnel off and drain the rest into the bottle. It's good right here because I forgot one thing. I had to take this hose back off because this thermostat doesn't have an air bleed hole in it. So the thermostat is sealed closed. There's no way for air to get out of the motor. So I took this heater core hose off, so that way it'll let all the air push out the motor up to here. And I guess theoretically it might start doing it at the back too. So I put this hose lower than that guy right there. So whenever this starts to overflow, then I'll pop this guy down so I don't make a big mess. And then I'll go ahead and pop this heater hose on. And then I know I at least have coolant up to the thermostat. Otherwise, you can lock the motor down with air, and then it guaranteed to overheat whenever you first started because the air temp isn't going to heat the thermostat up enough. You have to have coolant all the way up to the thermostat. Another hack, which is questionable, but I have done it, is you just take a real small drill bit and put a little hole in the thermostat, and that'll let air bleed past the thermostat. The only downside to that is if you do too big of a hole, then you might have trouble with the heater maintaining during the winter because it's always leaking by the thermostat, but didn't do that here. We're going with this method. All right, the funnel quit filling. The bottle somehow isn't full. Not sure how that's working out, but I can hear coolant in this upper radiator hose, so the radiator ought to be pretty full. So I think we're good enough to take this guy off and finish putting everything together because I don't see any leaks yet. That was a mess I made, ignore that. And that is that, all back together. So not gonna run it yet. I'm gonna go ahead and get the engine oil changed. I don't wanna do that when it's hot. So I'll go ahead and do the rest of that stuff in the next deal, and we'll call this one done for now.